Hello and welcome to King's Cross in central London. We're here at the Francis Crick Institute for the fourth of our leader interviews. Now, this is still a construction site, but it will soon be the largest biomedical laboratory in Europe. When it opens, scientists from all over the world will be here peering into test tubes. Right now, though, we're using this cool location to meet British political leaders and to peer into their minds and hear their visions for the country. Tonight, I'm with Nigel Farage, leader of UKIP. Nigel Farage, you have criticised the establishment parties. Let me quote something at you. As the 7% that go to public schools dominate politics, the media, the arts, sport, every aspect of our life in this country, we've almost reached a situation where the only time these guys have met a working class man or woman is if they're driving the car.
Yes.
Tell us about your schooling.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I went to a school called Dulwich College in South London, which has been there for nearly 400 years.
It's a public school,
which was founded for 12 poor scholars and was all paid for by a benefactor. And interestingly, it was a tradition that they kept for many, many years. And after World War II, up until the year that I went there, 50% of the boys in my year came from working class backgrounds and were paid for by local education authorities.
You weren't one of those, though.
As part of what was called the Assisted Places Scheme. I wasn't one of those, no, but the interesting thing was that through school and then through working in the metals industry on the London Metal Exchange, I always worked with and I've always mixed with a very large cross-section of society.
Look, let's just be clear about this. By about 1990, you'd been to a public school, you were working in the city, and you had been a long-standing member of the Conservative Party. Now, some would say it's a bit of a barefaced cheek for you to say to the others, oh, you all establishment public school types, come on.
But what the others are saying is, I'm all right, Jack, let's pull up the ladder and not give people who didn't have the same opportunities as us the chance to get on. And what I'm saying is that actually it's wrong that the 7% now dominate more and more and more, and that something is actually missing. Why is it we haven't got more people in politics or the media that have come through the state school system? And I think the answer is pretty obvious. I think one of the biggest social mistakes we've made over the course of the last 50 years was to abolish hundreds of grammar schools, many of which had for centuries given people from all backgrounds the chance to attain their best. And the evidence for that is the recent Ofsted report that said that 2/3 of the brightest youngsters are not attaining their best.
Look, I'm focusing on your criticism of the other parties for being, if you like, establishment. Can we just talk about some of your, what you call People's Army, okay? You're the commander, but the generals. William Dartmouth, your foreign affairs spokesman, is he a kind of anti-establishment character? He's the 10th Earl of Dartmouth. He went to Eton.
Yes, the deputy leader of UKIP is called Paul Nuttall. He comes from Bootle.
Stuart Wheeler, he's party treasurer, anti-establishment.
And our immigration spokesman, Stephen Wolfe, comes from Moss Side, which I think at one point in time was the roughest estate in the whole of the country. And that's the point about UKIP.
Neil Hamilton, anti-establishment, former Tory MP.
We have got
Douglas Carswell, one of your MPs, educated at Charterhouse. Mark Reckless from Marlborough.
So tell me, tell me another party. Tell me another party.
All parties have people from public schools. I'm not suggesting that going to a public school disqualifies you from politics.
Well, I think
you're the one who pointed out the other parties.
You are missing the point about UKIP completely. Yes, you can quote the posh people in UKIP, and we've got them, of course.
Look,
we have.
Half the people who you describe as key people on your website are privately educated or Oxbridge educated.
But you look at the number of genuinely working class people in UKIP, in senior positions in UKIP, and it's way ahead of the other parties. And we try to do things as a meritocracy.
Let's look at the policies, because you've said you want to help ordinary people.
Yep.
But when we look at the tax cuts you're proposing, one of them is to abolish inheritance tax. That's something that benefits the richest 6% of families and estates. You want to cut the top rate of tax.
No, we don't.
And you want to raise the 40p band.
Well, you ought to do your research a bit better, because you're wrong about the top rate of tax. We're not proposing at this...
long-term aspiration to get the 45p rate down to 40p.
But it's not in this manifesto, because it's not a priority.
Okay, it's mentioned in the manifesto.
Since 2006, we've campaigned for no tax on the minimum wage. When we first said it, we were isolated. The Liberal Democrats picked up with that, and now others are beginning to follow us. So we've been arguing for taking Malay paid out of tax for a very, very long time. What we're now arguing is that there is a squeeze middle. There are people out there who are experienced nurses or police officers who are paying 40p tax, a level that was designed to be for those earning a very great deal of money.
Let's move on. And one of the great mysteries of British politics, or maybe it's not such a mystery, is that there's quite a high level of public support for some of the things that UKIP stands for. Control of immigration. Yeah. There are plenty of people who don't like the EU in this country. You could probably quote the figures better than I can. And yet, in the polls, 85% of the population say they're not going to vote UKIP. And even at your absolute peak in the European elections, you're still at sort of 70% of the population who don't choose to vote UKIP. So somehow you're scoring lower than the policies.
Well, actually...
Is this because there are a lot of people who think UKIP just has a faint whiff of meanness about it, or is a divisive party?
No, I mean, look, you know, given the history of British politics, for UKIP to have got to where it's got to is pretty remarkable. I mean, there have been the scores of attempts over the last 60 or 70 years to get new parties off the ground, most of which, you know, have absolutely bombed. And this is not a top-down party. This was a grassroots welling up. I meet people on my doorsteps every day who say, I completely agree with you, but we're going to vote Labour, because we always have done, or I'm going to vote Tory, because we always have done. So we have a political system in Britain that chiefly, I think, because of the first-past-the-post system, does keep a certain tribal loyalty to a colour. You know, we're reds or we're blues, as opposed to issues. On your second point, I mean, there has been, and I think this is because we're taking on the establishment, and I think this happens not just in politics, it happens in science, it happens in business. If you take on the consensus, they make life very hard for you. There has been a very consistent attempt to try and paint UKIP out to be something that it isn't.
I wonder, I mean, that could all be true. I wonder actually whether it's something to do with your tone and the way you talk about the issues such as immigration, which is a big part of your programme.
Yeah.
I want us to look at a clip of you. Now, this is you speaking to Fox Television in the US, not to voters here, earlier this year. Let's just have a look at that clip and get a comment.
Wherever you look, you see this blind eye being turned, and you see the growth of ghettos where the police and all the normal agents of the law have withdrawn, and that is where Sharia law has come in. Yeah?
Indeed. So where are these ghettos? Where are these ghettos?
Well, if you go to any part of France and speak to any French politician, they will tell you there are a lot.
You're talking about the UK.
Yeah, well, that particular interview, I was talking about France, actually.
No, this is about the UK.
No, I have not said that. What I have said about the UK, well, certainly the bit I have said is
you've said there are no go areas in France, but this was, I think, about the UK.
Yeah,
definitely about the UK.
What I was saying about the UK, and I think they're different interviews, but nonetheless, what I've said about the UK is that uncontrolled mass immigration has led to increasing division and ghettoisation in our towns and cities.
Are there areas where the police and normal agents of the law have withdrawn and where Sharia has come in?
Not in... well, you could argue there are parts of the country where it's happened. In France, it's a much bigger problem than it is here, and that's what I was talking about. But you know, there are... we've had even the Archbishop...
It wasn't about France, it was about the UK.
Well, I doubt...
you said wherever you look. Wherever you look.
I think you're wrong. But anyway, the point is this. Even up to the last Archbishop of Canterbury, we've had people saying that Sharia law should be acceptable in our cities. Now, you know,
well, I think he was somewhat misunderstood in that, and I think he was
perhaps sometimes on these issues we all get misunderstood.
We have Jewish courts sometimes in this country. Yeah. We have Jewish courts in this country. Are you against those?
No, what I'm talking about is what is, you know, primary law. What is the law of the land? And are we...
So you resolve from the phrase, wherever you look, you see a blind eye being turned, you see the growth of ghettos and Sharia law coming in. You didn't say it.
Well, the blind eye has been turned, and we've seen the consequences of that in some of our big northern cities. With frankly, some of the most appalling sexual scandals that I think we've seen in our history, and that directly because the blind eye was turned.
Right. You call yourself straight talking. Now, last year you took out a full-page ad in the Daily Telegraph.
Yep.
You claimed that 7% of all crime across the EU member states was caused by 240 Romanian gangs. Now, that wasn't correct, was it?
I believe it was.
No, it was 7% of all of criminal gangs were 240 Romanian gangs, not 7% of all crime. Well, now, if you're going to be straight talking, if you're going to hit,
I think what that
your straight talking where you're going to hit these so-called taboo issues that no one else talks about, then you need to be a bit careful.
I think what that advert said also was there had been 28,000 arrests of one particular nationality within the Metropolitan Police area over the space of the last 5 years.
And I know some people quibbled with those figures as well. I didn't go into those because it's harder to get data on those, so it's harder to be sure. But we can be sure that you misunderstood the data about Romanian gangs. Does it worry you that if you sound off on foreign criminals, foreigners with HIV, you talk about our borders open to hundreds of millions of people,
which they are,
all of these things may be true. There are people with HIV. There are foreign criminals. All of these may be true. But if you make such a big, if you ramp up the rhetoric on these issues, many British people will say, look, this party is just not where I want it to be, with modern British values of tolerance, worldliness, and being a good global citizen.
To wake people up to the truth of what's going on, you sometimes have to say things in a way to get noticed. Of that, there's no question. However, political parties evolve and change. And if you look at the way UKIP is fighting this general election, everything through our manifesto, to all the speeches I've given all over the country, what I'm saying is this: we no longer need to make the negative arguments about the effect that immigration has had on primary school places, on healthcare provision, on wage compression. The argument we are now making is that we're the one party that firstly offers a solution, which is to take back control of our borders, and secondly has a positive and an ethical vision for how immigration should be managed by having an Australian-style point system. And I think so.
But you know, I'm actually not quibbling with the policy. I'm not even. I'm not really trying to talk to you about the policy. I'm trying to talk to you about the tone. Let's move on. You've talked about a fifth column.
And
people who hate us.
And I'm answering by saying this to you, by saying that in order to get the public aware of some of these issues, perhaps at times that tone had to be used. But you are not hearing. But hang on, you are not hearing, and you're interviewing me now as we approach a general election. You are not hearing that tone from me.
You talked about a fifth column. You talked about a fifth column this year. This is within a few months. You talked about a fifth column. The Muslim religion, people who come and don't want to be part of our culture. There's no previous experience in our history of a migrant group coming to Britain that wants to change who we are.
I haven't talked about the Muslim religion like that.
But this I'm quoting you from January.
I've talked about a mercifully small percentage of the Muslim population. So if you're going to quote me, let's get it right, okay? A mercifully small percentage of the Muslim religion.
Who is the fifth column?
Well, the fifth column are those within that wish to fight us. Now, look,
those who sympathise.
I do not.
Those who sympathise with Charlie Hebdo, for example, would they be a fifth column?
Those that are prepared to act upon it would be a fifth column.
Right.
And as we know,
so
something like 700, maybe 1,000 British people have gone to fight in Syria. So we know this exists. We have seen examples of this in France. We've seen examples of this in Britain. We've seen examples of this in Denmark. Should we be concerned about it? Yes, of course we should.
Of course we should. You've talked about Muslims. You've talked about Judeo-Christian. You've talked about. You mentioned other Muslims.
No, I'm not having this.
Let's.
No, I'm not having this.
Put that aside.
I'm not going to put that aside. I have said.
Okay, you've talked about some Muslims.
A mercifully small percentage.
Some of the people who've come here and who are of the Muslim religion.
So let's be clear.
Some of the people who've come here and who are of the Muslim religion. You've talked about Judeo-Christian heritage.
Yes.
You talk of being uncomfortable on a train where everyone else is speaking a different language. You've talked in recent days of giving homes to Christian refugees and only Christian refugees from the troubled zones of the Middle East and North Africa. Aren't people entitled to think that as a party, and you as the leader, are happier with some migrants than other migrants, based on ethnic or national background, and nothing to do with the skills or the languages that they bring?
Well, do you think it would be a good idea if you had if you were running your own immigration policy, which of course Britain doesn't because we're EU members? Do you think it'd be a good idea to get a lot of people to come